Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of the Staff Wellness and Health Booster Sessions. My name is Chad Saxon. I'm a communication specialist, with the Shared Health Communications team, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. Our topic this month is Healing by Making Meaning with Jody Voth. We will get to Jody in a few seconds, but we have a few housekeeping items just to go over first. Of course, to support the mental health and wellness of health system workers and the public, Shared Health and our Psychological Health and Safety Committee partners have brought together skilled trainers from across the province to facilitate the staff health and wellness booster sessions. Today's session will take participants through an interactive exploration of the question, where are we now, as it relates to the pandemic and other current challenges. Participants will learn about the importance of language and storytelling to make meaning and as tools that support healing and offer protection from negative outcomes following difficult events. As I mentioned earlier, our presenter today is Jody Voth with Manitoba Blue Cross. Jody has over 15 years of clinical and EAP experience as an intake worker, therapist, and leader. Jody has experience providing program leadership, one-on-one counseling, leader consultation, critical incident stress debriefings, and grief debriefings. She is also the developer of the Leader Resilience Group model and has delivered these groups to over 100 leaders during the pandemic. Prior to entering the mental health field, Jody worked as a healthcare aide in a personal care home in southern Manitoba. She also has a Master of Marriage and Family Therapy degree from the University of Manitoba. Following Jody's presentation, we'll have a few minutes for questions. I ask that you enter your questions, if you have any, into the question feature on the GoToWebinar platform, and we'll get to them once she's has completed her presentation, And also, of course, today's session is being recorded and we'll make it available as a streaming video on demand on the Shared Health COVID-19 Mental Health Resources page. And with that, I will turn things over to Jody.
Thank you very much, Chad, and welcome here, everybody. I can't see you guys, but I hear that we've got a good turnout today, so I'm really excited to be able to present to you. As Chad mentioned, I'm the Manager of Employee Assistance Services at Manitoba Blue Cross, and one of the things that I've been really excited to be able to do over the last couple of years has been to deliver a number of groups to leaders specifically through the pandemic, acknowledging that there has been a challenging experience at all levels of the organization within healthcare through the pandemic, and that leaders have had some unique experiences in that. Through those group debriefings that I've delivered, I've learned a lot about what happens when we encounter a really protracted or long-term challenge like the pandemic has presented to us. And through that experience and the research that I've done to support the process, I think there have been some key pieces that I can bring to you today that I hope will resonate for anybody who, wherever you might be in the process, in this experience, and whatever your experience has been through the pandemic as somebody working within healthcare or otherwise. Just one little piece of housekeeping before we really get into it. You are going to need either you can use your phone, so go onto a browser on your phone, or you can use your phone's camera if you're familiar and comfortable with scanning QR codes with that, and it'll take you to the place that you need to go. Or you can open a browser in your laptop as well and go straight there with an address that I'm going to give you shortly. But we're going to use a little tool called Slido. I will acknowledge it's my first time using it within a presentation, but I've practiced it a number of times with my colleagues, so everything should run smoothly. But I've been able to use this as a participant at conferences in the past, and it's really made a nice interactive process where everybody gets to feel like they're engaging in activities together. So we're going to use that a couple of times today. And actually, before we really get into the material I've prepared, we're going to start with the first Slido poll. So on this screen, you can either scan the QR code with your phone, or you can go to slido.com, and then at the top, you're going to see a bar where you can enter a number, and the number is right on your screen in front of you here. When I take you over to the next slide, you're still going to see this information. So if it's taking you a few seconds, don't worry. As the slide shifts, you still have access to the QR code, Slido's website, and that number. But if you can go ahead and go there now, I'm going to put a question in front of you right away. So one of the things that we know and that I've really seen as a result of these group experiences that I've facilitated has been this experience of we need to have a sense of being oriented to person, place, and time. So this is actually one of the key screening tools that we sometimes use when we're assessing somebody's overall wellness and their personal wellness in a moment. what we have seen is that in many ways throughout the pandemic experience, we've had a hard time orienting ourselves to a time. You've probably heard a lot of people talk about things like, I don't even know what day of the week it is right now, or I don't even know how long we've been in this thing, or we're using the pandemic as the frame of reference for, oh, well, that must have been 2 years ago because it happened before the pandemic. What we've also seen is that when we can have a sense of where we are in a time frame of something, we're better able to start to integrate that experience into our broader life story. And I'm going to talk a little bit about integration later on in the presentation. But before we dive into all of that, I want to give you an opportunity to right now, and don't put a lot of thought into this, but I want to give you a chance to put yourself somewhere in this experience. So we're going to use a star system, 1 star being the very beginning of the pandemic experience and 10 being this thing's over, I'm at the end and I'm moving forward. I want you to rate on the Slido where you would say that you are right now. And I'll give you guys a few minutes or a few seconds on the screen to go ahead and do that, and then we'll just kind of see where we land on an average and where the responses are at. And this is one of the things that I really love about Slido is we get to see the real-time responses from participants, and everybody can see where they are within that broader experience as well. While you're doing that, I just want to reinforce again that concept of when we can have a sense of where we are within an experience, it's sort of like placing ourselves on a roadmap. So this pandemic experience, we've heard a lot about feeling quite lost in things, not knowing especially when the end is going to come, and that feeling really murky for people, and not having a good sense then of, is there something that I can look forward to? Do I want to look forward to something? Where are the markers in this? Again, feeling really disoriented in it. It looks like the responses have settled down, so I'm going to say that on average, it looks like we're sitting at about a 7.1, which I will tell you is pretty much what I've heard everyone else scale themselves at recently. So you guys are well within normal range on that. But interestingly, it really is kind of clumped around that. I don't feel like this thing is really over yet, and also it does feel like we've turned some kind of a corner. But when I have an opportunity to explore this with people in a bit more detail in terms of what's behind that number, what informs your choosing that number, it's often fairly mixed. So I want to just validate if that's where you're at today. If it feels like it wasn't easy to pick a number, I hear that a lot, and that's pretty normal for folks right now. So I'm going to start taking us into the material that I've prepared. So first of all, what do I mean by making meaning? That was the title of today's presentation. It's really about being able to make sense of things and orient ourselves in that experience in a way so that we don't feel like we're just floating or adrift. We know that when we take the time to make meaning from a difficult experience, whether that's an acute event, so something that was really short, maybe just happened within a very small space of time, or something that's much more protracted like the pandemic experience has been, when we do that, when we take the time to process the experience, find a way to tell ourselves a story about it and position ourselves within that story, this helps us to, it's a protective factor that prevents us from becoming bound to that experience in an unhelpful way. When we talk about a trauma and an acute trauma, we often, there's a lot of research to support this awareness that people can become attached to that in a way that doesn't help. So if we look at PTSD symptoms, for instance, when we remain attached to that experience in an unhelpful way, we can often become quite triggered by things that connect us back to that experience. And this is what we want to help people to untangle themselves from as we move forward from the pandemic, wherever you might be in that. Maybe you feel like you've already moved forward. That's cool. You might feel like you're still at the very beginning or somewhere in the early stages of that pandemic experience. And wherever you're at, I think it's important to know that there is value in making sure that we take the time to make meaning rather than moving forward too quickly. Some of the high-level things to know about difficult experiences, again, whether they're acute or more protracted, is that they have a tendency to challenge our assumptions about life, about the people around us, and about the world in general. They can be quite disorienting for many of the reasons just mentioned in the point above. So when we start to reevaluate our assumptions about things in our worldview, often the next question that comes about is, well, then where do I fit within all of this? And that's that disorientation piece. I don't know where I can place myself anymore, or I don't know how I relate to these other aspects or my context around me. And so this can do one of two things. Sometimes we can feel like we're quite stuck as a result because we haven't fully figured that stuff out. And other times it can actually lead to what I would call transformative change, where we reevaluate, we decide where we want to be, or we develop a cohesive story about that thing that happened to us and where we are in it. And we use that to inform, this is the way that I'm going to see the world from here on out. This is the way that I'm going to relate to the people that are important in my life. This is the way that I'm going to construct my life going forward. And some of the stories that have come out of the pandemic experience are already speaking to that. I think a fairly common one is many people had reasons to reevaluate relationships in their life, perhaps because there were periods of time where we just couldn't connect with everybody anymore. And maybe that meant we realized, wow, this relationship's actually a lot more important to me than I thought it was. I want to reinvest or invest differently in that one. And maybe it was actually the opposite, where, wow, I've actually not missed that relationship as much as I thought I would have. And I'm reevaluating similarly based on that information. So that's just one example of how things can shift and change as we go through difficult experiences. And the pandemic has created a number of opportunities for us to do that. The one thing that's key to know, though, is that it's uncomfortable. We're humans, we're hardwired to stay within things that are safe and familiar. And even if they're not good for us, familiarity is always preferable, because what we know, we can generally feel safe in because we know how to deal with it. So the discomfort of change can often motivate us to jump ahead before spending time on that meaning making thing, that kind of sitting with the discomfort and the uncertainty to sort through, digest, process, whatever word you want to use, before moving ahead into that whatever comes next. So just to put this into a diagram, the white portion of this, so the circle's the arrow that kind of is going through the diagram. I'm gesturing to my screen. Of course, you can see me pointing at that. That's the part where it's going through something. It's taking the time to really engage with all those components of the experience to develop that integrated or cohesive story about what's happened to me and where am I in this thing, to come out on the other side with perhaps some transformation or even just a deeper understanding of ourselves and our whole life experience and how this one piece of that experience fits within the broader context of our lives. The dark blue sort of speaks to that trying to bypass things. So when we deny an experience, we have a tendency, and generally that denial is coming out of some sense of, this is uncomfortable. I might feel like I just want to get past this. I just want to move on. And that's all valid. And again, really normal for humans. The unfortunate thing is that it tends to increase our risk to have negative outcomes on the other side of that. And sometimes it can put us into a bit of a spinning cycle where we go back into some of the negative emotional outcomes of that experience, back to, I want to get away from the discomfort, and kind of spinning around and around in a way that isn't as constructive. Some of the things that we've seen as a result of this experience, and this means at all levels, so you'll see I've indicated individual, the work group, organizations as a whole, and then the broader community. All levels have been impacted, and I've just highlighted a few of the things here. Languishing is a really good term. I would encourage you to look it up afterwards. I know when we started talking about this probably about a year and a half ago, a lot of people were like, yes, that term really speaks to where I'm at right now. And I think that continues to be the experience of many of us as we find our way forward and still try to deal with some of the residual or hangover component of this experience that we've been through for the last couple of years. Disillusionment is another one that I would highlight. I think that many people have also experienced that sense of, this isn't really what I thought I could expect of the people around me, for instance. So this is really not the way I thought it would go if I followed all the rules, for instance. These are phrases that I've heard a lot, and that sense of disillusionment and thinking like, maybe my beliefs about my community, or maybe my beliefs about myself, or maybe my beliefs about the people that I have relationships with, whatever. I'm reevaluating that because it just doesn't feel like what I signed up for, so to speak. At a broader level, let's go out to the community, for instance. Some of the consequences of the experience that we've had have been things like isolation. People have felt really alone during times when they haven't been able to connect with others. And it's important for us to, all of these outcomes that are highlighted here, or emotions, it's important for us to take the time to acknowledge that those are real. They've had an impact. Most of them had a ripple effect. And taking the time to bring all that together and find language for it, which I'll speak to in a minute, is going to be a really important part of making meaning of this experience, helping ourselves to not become bound to it in a negative way, as uncomfortable as it is to sit with this a little bit, and then hopefully moving forward in a healthy manner. So how exactly do we do this thing of making meaning that I'm talking about? I'm saying, well, it's worth it to invest in the discomfort of going through an experience rather than around it, and taking the time to acknowledge what has happened. But what does that look like? So as I said before, some of this is about orientating ourselves to person, place, and time. So, okay, who am I? Have I changed substantially as a result of this experience? Or are there things about me that are different now? It would make sense if that were true. When we go through something significant, positive or negative, it has an impact on us. And really, essentially, life is always changing us in some way. So getting a sense of who am I as a result of this thing that I've been through? Where am I in it? And where am I in my life right now? So being able to answer questions like that scaling question I asked you at the beginning is an important component of being able to start making meaning out of an experience, because we've already oriented ourselves to a time in that experience. So if you, like the average responder, said, I'm a 7 out of 10, okay, that probably doesn't answer all the problems of the world or give you a clear sense of how to get to 10 if that's what you aspire to. But I hope that it gives you that small sense of I'm anchored in a moment. At least today I'm at a 10. In therapy, we often ask clients to respond to scaling questions on a pretty regular basis because it can help people to track progress. It can also help them to start with a question that might be a deeper one. You know, like I said before, what's underneath that number? So if tomorrow you scale yourself at a 6, for instance, when today you said 7, what changed? And just unpacking that a little bit can be a really useful self-reflection process. I've also alluded to the importance of finding language. I mentioned earlier that, of course, when we want to make meaning out of something, finding words for it can be really important. One of the things that I heard a lot from people throughout the pandemic was that it was hard to find the words to describe their experience. And when I looked at the research, I found that actually finding words to describe an experience is not only really critical just in general for our mental and emotional well-being, but especially when it comes to an experience that's been really difficult and potentially traumatic, and particularly experiences where moral injury has maybe played a part. So at the end of the day, what this means is that when we can find the words to describe our experience, we're much more likely to be able to do something constructive with that. Largely because when we can label something, we can externalize it. So when I can say, I feel disillusioned, for instance, it's the first step towards seeing that I'm not the problem is the problem. So if I can start to label some of the things that I've felt and experienced through this pandemic, it's quite likely that I can start to see that maybe there isn't something broken about me, but there's been an experience that I've been through that has caused me to feel this way. And those emotions are normal and valid responses to the kind of thing that I've been through. That's kind of what externalizing means. Again, the problem is the problem, I'm not the problem. And when we can find words to identify what the problem is or some components of it, we're on our way to being able to externalize. The other thing is that we can put a bit of a container or a frame around something when we can start to use labels to describe it. So similarly to orienting to person, place, and time, when I can say, here are the things that were part of this experience for me. And I can say, you know, that maybe happened, that was really present for me, that was really strong a couple of years ago, but I'm feeling that a little bit less now. It's kind of starting to put it in a bit of a container. It's another way of looking at that externalizing thing, where if one of the metaphors I really love to use is, if you think about milk, when it's in a jug and you can put it in the fridge or put it on the counter or pour it into a cup, it's very useful. But if the milk doesn't have the jug, it's just kind of a mess and you can't really do a whole lot with it. So finding language for things helps us to put a jug for that milk. When we talk about story, and story is really critical to this process of making meaning as well, we need to have words if we're going to describe a story, if we're going to be able to place ourselves in that story in any way. And so when we talk about that concept of integration that I mentioned earlier, it's really important to have words so that we can develop that cohesive narrative, that cohesive story about the experience and our role in it. It's not just for our own purposes, although that might be where it stays. Maybe it's really just about me being able to say, the pandemic happened, and this is how I knew that it started, and then this is what I did, or this is what happened in my life, and it felt like this, and I did that, and this is how I came through it, and now here I am. That's kind of a very Cole's Notes version of a story, but again, I would have to use words to be able to create that story and give myself a sense of where am I in this thing. narrative therapy is really based on this, actually. It's a model of therapy where we use a lot of things like developing language for problems, identifying that the problem is the problem, not the person is the problem, externalizing things. So there's a whole body of work that's associated with the importance and the meaning of the stories that we tell ourselves about our life, about our experiences. I'm going to take you guys to another Slido now, and now we're going to use the word stuff that we've been talking about. So again, the instructions are here on how to get there, but it's also in the sidebar. I want you now to take a moment to go into the poll, and you can enter as many words as you want. There's no limit to this, but I'm going to invite you to use some words to describe how the pandemic has made you feel, or how are you feeling today, or when you start thinking about the story, words that you might use for that story. And please, I encourage you to throw in as many as you want, because I think that this is a really complex experience for us. And so there might be really positive words, there might be really heavy words. And sometimes when we can start to put those words out there, and again, see them in a context like this, where I love how this word cloud's already getting built, this is really nice. I think it just connects us to that we're all in this and we're all feeling something, and there's going to be some overlap in some of those experiences. So yeah, and I'm seeing overwhelmed is showing up really big, which means that a lot of people are using that one. So this is something that's not unusual when we do these word clouds. And again, you know, any good story has a beginning, middle, and an end, hopefully. It also has components that are positive and negative. So as you're thinking about words to throw out there, I think especially when we're still feeling very much in something, it's pretty easy to come up with those heavy words, or the ones that are identify more with the challenging aspects of the experience. I'd also invite you to put words out there, if you can find them, that might be associated with something that was positive. You know, maybe a day where laughter came a little bit more easily, or you were able to connect with something that was a source of joy or pleasure for you. And if that doesn't come, that's okay. But just again, to invite you into that idea of stories having demonstrations of strength, positive aspects, as well as that stuff that's more challenging and heavy. And thank you for continuing to throw words. I'm seeing that that it's still developing, so I'm going to leave it up until I see things stabilize a little bit, and then I'll move forward to the next slide. But just to call out some of the ones that I'm seeing that really pop out here: overwhelmed, frustrated, those are big ones. Angry, tired, scared, anxious, worried, all kind of along the same theme there. Burnt out, isolated, sad, confused. Yeah. I will, I think this poll is going to remain active as I move forward through the slides. So if you guys want to keep on going with this one, then go for it. And if not, you're welcome to throw words into the chat that Chad is monitoring. And maybe Chad, I'll ask you to just kind of keep a list of those, and I can always add them later just to make sure that this fully reflects what the group came up with today. Because one of the things that I'll do is afterwards, I'm going to take I'll take a screenshot of the final word cloud, and then I'll send that to Chad so that he can add that to the slides. That way people who watch this later will be able to see what we came up with, and you guys will be able to have it too if you want to have a copy. So thank you. And again, as I go forward, if you're not able to continue to add it to the Slido, just put it into the chat and then I can put it in later. That won't be a problem. So what's this idea of integration? What do I mean by integration? Because I think that it can mean a lot of things. And when I think about it, there's two definitions that come to mind. So first of all, combining two things together so that they become a whole. That's like a pretty standard definition of integration. But when we talk about it in therapy or psychoanalytical terms, it's the process by which we achieve a balanced state within the psyche. And that's the result of bringing together all the potentially fragmented parts of ourselves, rather than trying to isolate or cut off or exile aspects of ourselves that might be uncomfortable or challenging. There's a model of therapy called internal family systems, and it really works with this understanding of people as complex beings. None of us are one thing. One of the examples that I've often used is, you know, even when it comes to a Saturday night, it's not difficult for most of us to relate to that experience of saying, part of me wants to stay in today and part of me would really love to go out. It's that idea that we're made up of lots of different parts and they aren't always in alignment. In fact, more often than not, there's conflict between the parts of ourselves. When we're in a state of balance, balanced well-being within ourselves, there is a sense of integration within those parts. So we're not at war with ourselves. All parts are accepted, even when they're challenging, even when they hold pain, even when they're parts that maybe aren't so easy to get along with, so to speak. So when I talk about integration, it's with that mentality of let's bring all of our parts of ourselves together and understand that a story has, as I said before, there's good parts and there's not so good parts. There's parts that are easy to love and parts that we might want to say, I don't ever want to think about that again. But really, integration is key to our ability to put this whole thing together into a story that's accurate and that helps us to make meaning from a challenging experience. So here I'm sharing some self-reflection questions, and don't worry about copying these down. Again, the slides are going to be available afterwards. But this is more about, I want to give you guys some tools to take away as you go forward from this presentation today to reflect a little further, to be able to start to come up with that cohesive, integrated story that describes your experience and hopefully begins to place you in it. So you'll notice that I've grouped the questions in pairs, and each pair is intended to be a bit balanced. So the first question will ask, well, what was a challenging experience that I had? And the second question, what was a positive experience that I had? How did I get through that tough stuff? And how did I celebrate the good stuff? And I hope that what you're seeing here too in the way that I phrase these questions is intended to draw out sources of resilience, because one of the things that we know is that when we can identify what got us through something, we're much more, again, it contributes to our ability to integrate and to develop a cohesive story. It also helps us to identify the things that are likely to be strengths for us in the future and help us to get through future challenging experiences. As we know, life doesn't throw us just one tough thing to deal with. It tends to come, repeatedly and sometimes more quickly than we'd like. When we can identify what helped us to get through a hard time, we're more likely to be able to access that tool in the future. And so this is why I ask a question like, how did I get through the tough stuff? Because it's not by accident you guys have continued to do really challenging jobs, to show up for friends, family, for yourselves even, or for your coworkers or the people that you look after in your role. Something was done there, whether it was intentional or subconscious. There are sources of resilience here, and I'd like you to start to think about what did get me through this? How did I see my way through this? Was it the team of people I have around me? Was it the fact that I really committed to just taking my dog for a walk every day, even when it was hard? Was it giving myself permission to just put on Netflix and chill out in the evening because that's all I had the capacity for? Whatever it is, there's no judgment here. And by the way, I love sharing this, although I hope that I'm not judged for it. Well, I'm just sharing something that I've heard from a lot of people. So I'll just tell you, I have not facilitated a single group through this experience where I've asked the question, what's gotten you through? Not a single group where somebody didn't say some version of alcohol. So honesty is welcome when you're self-reflecting. Although I don't encourage alcohol as the source of support, I think that recognizing that we've done what we've been able to do, Netflix, walk the dog, connect with friends when we can, that's the important thing here. And recognizing that we have gotten through this not by accident or by chance, but because we've done something, and those sources of resilience are important. And then the final group of questions is oriented around this story. So what's the story that I've been telling myself about this? Have I been saying, and sometimes it's not like a story like we think about a long novel, but even just those key phrases that we tend to say to ourselves, like if the phrase in our head every day is, oh, another really hard day, or another day where I'm not going to get everything done. I can say that to myself sometimes, often, probably more often than I should. That sets the tone for things. So what's the story? What are the words or the phrases that you've been using as you found yourself in this experience and navigating this experience? And then if you think about what's the phrase, words, the story that you'd like to tell yourself, the one that maybe highlights the sources of resilience or allows you to take a more balanced approach to this. Yeah, it's been really tough. And it's not been an accident that I'm still standing. So how do I tell myself a story that acknowledges both of those things? So I encourage you to take this away. I think I just have one more slide to show you now. And this is just a lovely quote from a conference I had the pleasure of attending within the last 6 months or so, by a wonderful Indigenous woman named Jan Derrick. She does some really great work, and specifically there was a component of this conference where we were speaking about story and the significance of story when it comes to making meaning from difficult experiences. And she said, sometimes people need to tell stories repeatedly in order to make meaning. And that really stayed with me. I thought, yeah, you know, sometimes we do have to tell ourselves or someone else the same story over and over again. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to watch for that shift that happens so that we notice when the story goes from, this is how I survived after this is what I suffered. When it comes to identifying those sources of resilience after it's been, oh, it's so hard. So I invite you to consider how that might connect for you. I think that's all that I want to share with you today. I'm going to just say thank you for the time. I'm very open to questions, comments, and Chad, I'll let me know if there's anything coming up in the chat.
Great, thanks for that presentation, Jody. It was really,
of course.
Yeah, very interesting, and I think touches on something that that maybe we didn't think of, that whole aspect of putting some words to this and trying to maybe hash it out a bit in our heads as to what we all went through, because I think we're often so much in the here and now that we probably don't even think of aspects such as that.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually just went back to the slide with the word cloud there. So if you did find that it was shut down when I went away from the slide, you're certainly welcome to go back into it now. But again, if folks just want to take a look at that, yeah, I just wanted to make sure people had another look.
Okay, not seeing any questions at the moment. So if anyone does have some questions, please enter them into the question box. One thing while I'm waiting some questions here, I'll just mention that this is our last booster session for a couple of months. We're going to take a July and August hiatus for the summer, and so we'll be back in September. That's the plan anyway. And so the plan as it is currently is to be back in September with some additional presentations. So we're looking forward to those. And I see the hand went up, so I'm just checking to see if there's any questions. Okay, my question is, that's all I got so far. So I think somebody's entering a question, they just maybe haven't quite finished it off.
No problem. No problem. I've got time.
But
I'm just looking at the words on here right now because I haven't had a chance to read them. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
No, I was curious as well. Like you had mentioned that these are somewhat kind of common, a lot of the comments that you're hearing on here.
Yes, absolutely. This is the first time that I've created one of these word clouds in a setting like this, but I can tell you that all of the words that I'm seeing on here right now are words that I've heard regularly, and it's interesting to see how much the bold or the larger words are also the ones that I would say people would probably in conversation underline and bold as well as the ones that really stand out. So one of the things that I hear a lot when I do facilitate groups is that the group experience really gives people that sense of, I'm not alone in this, I'm not the only one experiencing this. And this is why, just as a sidebar, it took me quite a while to get this to work into my PowerPoint, and I was very committed to it because I knew that it was going to be something that would make this experience so much more meaningful for people in terms of bringing in that component of a group where we all sit in a room and have the conversation together, where you can hear other people are using the same words that I am, other people are going through the same thing that I am, and I'm not alone. And that's one part of the piece that helps people understand that you're not the problem is the problem. The thing that we're going through is the problem.
An interesting way of phrasing it, the idea that the problem is the problem, because I think we tend to always sort of put everything on internalize and put everything on ourselves. Yeah. So it's a good way of phrasing that for sure. Yeah. We did have a question. Somebody was hoping that you could maybe go back to that slide with the circles and lines. I believe it was one of your first slides, and maybe just go a little bit more over that. Can you please experience in details about the slide of circles and lines? So I'm thinking maybe they just want to know a little bit more about it, but I'm not
sure. Yeah. So this one was actually developed largely out of the organizational work that we do here at Blue Cross. So when I think about people, organizations, and community, I always think, and I'm doing that with my hands now too, you can probably see, the concentric circles. So that represents two things, these circles that you're seeing. One, how all of those layers exist together. So there's the individual that exists within the work group, that exists within the organization, that exists within the broader community, and we could go one more, the world, or country, and then the world, whatever. You can keep going outwards. So it's just to indicate the size and how that all, like Russian nesting dolls, how it all nests together. It also communicates that concept of the ripple effect. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And essentially what we know is not necessarily directly individual, work group, organization, community sometimes, but that something that impacts one level will impact others, because things tend to ripple outwards and ripple inwards. And when we're doing the work of helping individuals or organizations or whole communities through a challenging experience, it's really key to keep that at the center of whatever our interventions are going to be, or our support mechanisms are going to be, because we know that, for instance, if an individual feels supported in their experience, chances are their work group's going to be in better shape, because that individual is bringing something better to the work group. The organization will benefit from that work group being strengthened, and the whole community as a result will benefit from that organization being in good shape. So just to kind of articulate that ripple effect a little bit more, the white words that are identified with each of these layers are just a few of the things that I wanted to pull out that I've heard from these various levels. So individuals talking about things like languishing or unresolved grief, relationship conflict. These are, again, some of these really common experiences people have had of this pandemic. Organizations, some of the things that we've heard about, and on and on. So that's that piece. And then again, that arrow going through is like, if you acknowledge and take the time to process, there's potential for future capacity increases, transformative change can happen. But when we don't, there's that increased risk of getting bound up in that negative experience. So if you think about kind of just going around and around through those white words that are there, that's what we want to try and avoid. I hope that helps, but I'm very open to questions if I glossed over something or if that wasn't clear.
No, I think it does explain it very well. And I think, like you said, if it's one of those things, if we try to kick the can down the road and don't deal with things, it can just continue to go in that cycle, as you had said.
And one thing that I would highlight as well is that everyone's going to do this on their own timeline. Like, this is certainly not intended to say, today you need to process this, because I think that the timing of that is a really important part of feeling like we have a sense of agency back. Like, I get to choose when I'm going to spend some time on this. It's also important because it just might not be the right time. Like, if for people that feel like they're really still in this, if someone scored themselves at a 3 at the beginning, I highly doubt that they're at a place where they want to start unpacking the emotions associated with this, because they're still in survival mode, and that's okay. Today is really about highlighting that at some point this needs to happen. I would say needs, if I can be so bold. And just to kind of cue what that could look like, or how you might start working on that now. But everybody's process is going to be different, and timing is a significant part of that process.
Absolutely. We had another question, and they were hoping that you could share that quote again at the end of your slide.
Yeah, of course. This is why I try and keep the slide numbers relatively low, so that I can fairly quickly navigate through them, because I get asked that, oh, can I see that slide again? I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to go back through 39 slides to find that one. So
it's a good idea. Great.
Yeah, I certainly, like I said before, I know Chad's going to make these available to you guys, but if you want to take a picture of this now, or a screenshot, or whatever you're working with, then please feel free to do so.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, as Jody mentioned, we, along with including the video of today's presentation, will also post a link to the slide presentation on there as well. So it's something that you can go back and access. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions at the moment, so I think maybe we'll close things down here. Again, I want to thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and I think a lot that we can all take away from it, and I think people will really benefit from. So again, thank you for taking the time to put that together, and then also to everybody who joined us today, thank you very much for being here. As I mentioned, we won't have any sessions in July and August, and we'll be back in September. Those that upcoming slate of sessions will be communicated through all the usual channels, so please keep an eye on your email for that. And of course, once again, you can find this presentation on the Shared Health Mental Health Resources page, and we'll look to have that up by probably mid next week. So hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you again, Jody, for your time today, And
Thank you for
goodbye.
having me.